Chapter 1. The Curse of Black Hollow. 2 centuries ago, in the darkest hollows of the Appalachian Mountains, the Montclair family, an old line of American aristocrats, rode silently through a dense fog that clung to the twisted pines like a shroud. The year was 1824, and the eldest son, Nathaniel Montclair, led the family procession through the narrow, treacherous path known as Black Hollow Ridge. Black Hollow was so named not only for the shadows that seemed to never lift, but for the sinister history whispered in taverns and farmhouses for miles around. Men spoke of a place abandoned long ago, an old stone chapel defiled by a cult, a house of unspeakable rituals and blood rites. The locals called it the Devil's Refuge. Few dared set foot there, and fewer still returned. Nathaniel's heart pounded as he urged his horse forward. His wife Eleanor rode beside him, clutching their daughter Abigail, riding ahead with the family's trusted guide. But suddenly, his blood ran cold. "Abigail," he called out sharply. "Where is she?" His voice was swallowed by the fog. There was no answer. The family halted, horses snorting nervously, mist curling around hooves and shadows. Nathaniel's gaze scanned the tree line, where the ruined chapel's jagged silhouette loomed like a broken fang against the gray sky. Something malevolent stirred there. Eleanor grasped Nathaniel's arm, trembling. "Nathaniel, she was just ahead. I saw her. Then, nothing." Her voice cracked with fear. Nathaniel swallowed hard and dismounted, striding toward the chapel's ruin. The air grew colder with each step, heavy with the sick, metallic scent of rust and decay. The trees seemed to lean in, branches like claws reaching out to snatch at his coat. Inside the broken chapel, shattered stained glass scattered across the dirt floor caught the dull light, casting fractured rainbows on the crumbling altar. But Nathaniel saw only one thing: a figure collapsed in the shadows. "Abigail," he cried, rushing forward. The girl lay motionless, eyes rolled back into her head, milky white and unseeing. Her skin was drawn tight, pale as a corpse's. Yet a strange glow flickered in the dark recesses of the chapel, a crimson gleam from across the room. Nathaniel's blood froze as a shadow stepped from the darkness. The man was tall and gaunt, his eyes burning a hellish red beneath a hood that seemed woven from shadows themselves. His lips curled into a cruel smile, sharp teeth glinting. "I am Malchus," the figure whispered, voice like dry leaves rustling over bone. "The servant of what is eternal, the devourer of souls. Your daughter's light is mine." Nathaniel drew his sword, shaking, but Malchus was already advancing, hands outstretched. The air thrummed with unnatural energy as the cultist's fingers brushed Abigail's forehead. Sucking sound echoed, like the wind torn through a broken void, and Abigail's chest heaved once, then stilled. The girl's eyes snapped open, but they were no longer children's eyes. They were empty, glazed, white as bone. Malchus's red eyes blazed brighter, and he laughed, a sound like cracking ice. "You are too late, Montclair. Your bloodline is marked." Just then, Nathaniel's guards burst in, weapons drawn. The cultist snarled and vanished into the shadows, but not before Nathaniel grabbed his cloak, wrenching it free. Beneath the folds lay a talisman, carved from blackened bone, etched with symbols older than memory. At the family estate, the Montclairs convened a grim council by candlelight. The patriarch, Nathaniel, demanded justice. The village preacher, Father Eldridge, spoke gravely. "This is no ordinary evil. Our scriptures tell of such darkness. It must be purged by fire." But Nathaniel, gleaming with resolve, opposed him. "The fire may cleanse the soul, but this demon's power runs deep. We must sever it utterly." The sentence was dreadful. Malchus was to be captured, bound, and executed, the body buried beneath the ruined chapel, the head locked away in a chest hidden in the Montclair mansion's secret vault deep beneath the basement. Before his capture, Malchus spat a curse with venomous fury. "So long as my head lies apart from my body, the women of your bloodline shall perish in childbirth." His voice lowered, almost a hiss. "And when reunited, I shall rise to drown your dynasty in blood." The family shuddered, but the sentence was carried out. The cultist's body was buried beneath the dilapidated altar where he had once drawn dark power. His head was sealed in an iron-bound box, locked away in the mansion's deepest catacomb. Generations passed. The Montclair estate weathered storms, war, and time's corrosive touch. The blood curse became legend, whispered only in family halls and forgotten journals. The country grew wild and new, but the darkness simmered beneath. 200 years later, in present-day Appalachia, the Montclair mansion still stood, a monolith of faded grandeur. Jonathan Montclair, the current family patriarch and a man of sharp, cold eyes, paced the ancient floors, haunted by shadows long past. His daughter Emily was a bright college student with a defiant streak, stubborn in her modern ways. Love had found her in the form of a young man named Daniel, a local with no pedigree, no family name to match the Montclair's legacy. Jonathan's fury burned like a low flame. The curse, he believed, was real. His wife had died, giving birth to Emily, a cruel echo of the old words. When Jonathan learned of Emily and Daniel's relationship, his voice cut like a blade. "You do not belong with him," he said, cold and unyielding. "Not if you value your life. Or ours." Emily's eyes flashed with anger. But Jonathan's silence spoke volumes. Late that night, Emily slipped from her room, racing through the creaking halls to find Daniel and their friends, Mark and Sarah, waiting in the shadowed driveway. "We're going to the estate," Emily breathed, urgency propelling her steps. "It's time to face the past." As the car wound through the darkened forest roads, the Montclair mansion rose like a fallen titan against the night sky, windows vacant and watching. Inside, an oil painting dominated the main hall, an imposing man in colonial garb, eyes narrowed with stern command. Emily stared, and then she saw it. His gaze shifted, not just the eyes, but behind them, flickering shadows, a flicker of something monstrous. Mark shivered. Did that painting just move? Daniel swallowed hard, gripping the flashlight. "Let's not stay too long." Driven by a mixture of dread and curiosity, they explored beneath the floorboards, where a hidden door led to the vault. There in the iron chest lay a human head, hair black as night, eyes closed tight. Emily held her breath. "Could this be," Mark whispered, "some soldier from the old days?" They sealed the chest again, unaware of the ancient evil stirring once more. Outside in the woods, a figure watched, eyes glowing red, teeth bared in a feral grin, and the wind carried a whisper, chilling and cruel. "The curse is awakened." Suddenly the earth beneath the old chapel trembled. A low, guttural growl seeped from the rotten stones. Something was coming alive. The nightmare was not over. Chapter 2. The Curse Beneath Black Hollow. 2 centuries ago, the winds that howled through the rugged hills of Black Hollow carried whispered warnings. Warnings ignored by the proud Masters family. They were the aristocrats of the New England frontier, their bloodline entwined with the very soil of the land. Yet there was darkness beneath their polished veneer, seeped deep into their roots like a venomous vine. The tale of Elias Samry, the devil's thrall, was one they whispered only in fear. Tonight, in the cold shadows of the Master's estate, the present-day heirs lived under the crushing weight of that ancient shadow. Thaddeus Masters, patriarch of the family and last scion of the once great line, sat alone in the great hall of Black Hollow Manor. The flickering firelight cast long, twisted shadows on the walls, as the storm outside clawed at the windows like a restless beast. Across from him, the portrait of his great-great-grandfather, Judge Jeremiah Masters, hung, a forbidding gaze that seemed to pierce the room itself. The judge's somber eyes held a secret, one steeped in blood and betrayal. But tonight, the still oil painting watched with something almost alive, something malevolent lurking beneath the aged canvas. Thaddeus's mind was restless. His daughter, Lila Masters, had defied his warnings yet again. She had fallen in love with a man utterly unworthy in his eyes, a young man named Sam Harper. Sam was a scholar, curious and kind, but with no family name, no pedigree to speak of. To the old Thaddeus, that meant nothing but disaster. "Father," Lila had pleaded just yesterday, voice trembling yet resolute. "Sam loves me. He's not like the others. He's different." But to Thaddeus, the difference was clear and unforgivable. His ancestry had been cursed, he told them, cursed ever since that fateful night 200 years ago, when Elias Samry had been sentenced to death for the unspeakable horrors he unleashed upon their line, and the curse he cast as his final act of defiance. The family priest had called for fire to purify the soul, but Jeremiah Masters had decreed a different fate for the fiend. Elias Samry's body was beheaded, the head locked away in a battered iron chest, buried deep beneath the floorboards of Black Hollow Manor, and the body interred in a forgotten crypt inside the ruins of a desecrated chapel, once a place of worship, now a sanctuary for dark rituals. Samry's curse was clear. As long as his head remained apart from his body, every woman in the Master's bloodline would die during childbirth. And if ever the head was reunited with the body, the demon would rise again to annihilate every living descendant. Thaddeus had never spoken these words aloud until now. He looked at Lila, whose face mirrored the haunted look of the women who came before her. But Lila was no longer his little girl. She was fierce, determined, and dangerously naive. That night, with rain beating down like cold fists against the windows, Lila slipped out of her room, clutching a small satchel. Sam was waiting in the rusted pickup outside, along with his closest friends, Marcus and Jenna. They were accompanying her to Black Hollow, the only place where the truth could be unearthed. The drive was tense, the headlights slicing through sheets of rain and curling mist. As they approached the manor, a sense of ancient dread enveloped them like a suffocating shroud. The iron gates groaned as they swung open, revealing the sprawling grounds, overgrown and wild. Inside, the manor was a cavern of shadows and whispers. The walls, once regal with ornate woodwork, now bore the scars of neglect, paint peeling, floors creaking underfoot, and shadows pooling deep in the corners. In the great hall, Lila's hand trembled as she reached towards the portrait of Judge Masters. The painted eyes seemed to glint unnaturally in the candlelight, and for a heartbeat, she thought she saw the faintest smirk curl the judge's lips. "Do you really believe this curse?" Marcus whispered, the flicker of fear in his voice betraying his skepticism. Lila's gaze remained locked on the portrait. "I don't believe. I know." They moved carefully across the floorboards, guided by a century-old floor plan Lila had scavenged from the town's historical archives. Beneath the grand hall lay a cellar, a forgotten crypt where the iron chest was said to be hidden. The air grew colder, heavier, as they descended stone steps slick with mold and decay. The cellar smelled of damp earth and rot. Somewhere within its depths lay the iron chest, Samri's prison. Jenna lit a small lantern, the pale light dancing across the walls, revealing grotesque graffiti etched long ago in blood-red paint, symbols of a cult that had once thrived in this forsaken place. The words clawed at their sanity, names of demons and unholy incantations. "Why would the family keep something like this here?" Jenna shuddered. "Because they never wanted it found," Lila said grimly. "But we have to." After what felt like hours, they found it. An ancient iron chest, chained and padlocked, embedded beneath a loose section of floorboards. Sam kneeled and pried it open with trembling hands. Inside, wrapped in a shroud black as night, lay a severed head. Its skin was shriveled and pale, eyes closed as if in eternal sleep. But there was a sinister beauty to it, an unnatural stillness that chilled the soul. Marcus stared, disbelief drawing pale on his face. "This can't be real." Lila reached out, her fingers brushing the cold, cracked flesh. Almost immediately, a flicker of movement, a twitch of the lips, a faint, almost imperceptible pulse beneath the skin. "Put it back," Jenna hissed. "It's not right." Driven by a reckless curiosity, lifted the head from its resting place. In that instant, the cellar seemed to exhale, a slow, rumbling breath that echoed through the stone walls like a warning. The air surged, cold and electric, and the candlelight flickered wildly. Outside, the storm tore at the manor's timbers, and the ground beneath Black Hollow trembled ever so slightly, as if some ancient evil had stirred awake. "Let's seal it back," Lila said, voice quivering. "Tonight." But the moment the chest was moved, the shadows shifted. From the darkness, a low, guttural growl emerged, deep and otherworldly, resonating in the marrow of their bones. A pair of blood-red eyes snapped open, and in that moment, the curse of Elias Samri breathed anew. Weeks later, the sleepy town surrounding Black Hollow was unraveling. Strange disappearances, unexplained screams in the dead of night, shadows stalking the fog-choked streets. Marcus vanished without a trace. Jenna was found, her body mangled and drained of life, eyes turned blank and white. Thaddeus Masters returned to the manor, his face pale, his hands trembling. "It has begun," he whispered. "The curse is awake." Lila and Sam stood outside the crumbling ruins of the chapel, once a place of salvation, now a blighted ground soaked in evil. The desecrated altar lay overturned, occult symbols scrawled in blood crusted on the stones. This was where Elias Samri's body had been hidden, waiting for the head's return. And now, beneath those shattered stones, a monstrous force clawed its way back to life. As the wind howled, a dark figure emerged from the depths, limbs twisted, eyes burning with infernal rage, a silent death stalking on talons of malice. Behind them, the gates of Black Hollow slammed shut, trapping the descendants of the cursed line within the shadows of an ancient nightmare. Chapter 3. The Unearthing. The air hung thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying wood as the moon carved silver shards through the dense canopy above. The ancient forest surrounding the grand estate of the Whitmore family seemed to hold its breath, as if the very trees were watching, waiting. Somewhere deep within, a distant owl called out, its mournful cry swallowed by an oppressive stillness that settled over the land like a shroud. Samantha Whitmore shifted the strap of her backpack, her heart thudding in a steady rhythm that clashed with the eerie quiet. Beside her, Sanjay's footsteps crunched softly against the bed of fallen leaves, and behind them followed Anand and Sapna, their whispered voices barely carrying over the wind. All four of them moved in uneasy tandem down the narrow path that led toward the long-abandoned Whitmore family estate, an old mansion that had stood since the early 1800s. The Whitmores were once a powerful aristocratic family, known across the region for their influence and wealth. Now, the mansion was a husk of shadows and secrets, swallowed by years of neglect and a darker legacy that clung stubbornly to its walls. Samantha's mind replayed the words her father, Thaddeus Whitmore, had spoken just hours before in the cold light of the study. His voice had trembled as he recounted the curse that had plagued their family for 2 centuries, the curse born from the malevolent figure of Malachi Samuels, a name whispered among the oldest Whitmore records, a devil worshipper whose death had been sealed by ritual and blood, but whose spirit lingered still, waiting for release. Her fingers tightened around the photograph of her great-great-grandfather, Jonathan Whitmore, whose stern gaze from the sepia-toned portrait seemed to follow her with silent accusation. The painting hung crookedly in the mansion's east wing, just like it had in her childhood memories. Jonathan had presided over the trial of Malachi Samuels 200 years ago. The story went that Malachi was decapitated, his body buried beneath the ruins of an old church desecrated by his own cult, and his head locked away in a strongbox deep within the mansion's secret chamber. The 4 friends reached the heavy iron gate that guarded the back of the estate, its rusted bars entwined with thorny vines. Beyond lay the overgrown courtyard, cracked stonework, and the looming shadow of the mansion itself, towering like a specter against the moonlight. The place smelled of rotting wood, rotting memories. Anand hesitated, pulling out a flashlight whose beam pierced the darkness like a knife. "Are you sure about this? Breaking into your family's mansion, Sam?" Samantha swallowed hard. "If we don't face this, nothing will change. My family's history is tied to that curse. I need to know what's hidden there." Sanjay's voice was steady beside her. "We'll be careful." Sapna gave him a wary look but nodded. "At least we're together." The group slipped through the gate and approached the mansion's rear entrance, a battered wooden door swollen from years of rain. Sanjay pushed it open with a groan of protest from rusty hinges. Inside, the air was thick with dust and shadows, the silence broken only by the soft scuffling of their footsteps on cracked floorboards. The interior smelled of mold and forgotten times. Wallpaper peeled like shedding skin, and shattered chandeliers dangled precariously from the ceiling. The furniture, draped in white sheets, looked like ghosts frozen in time. Guided by flickering flashlight beams, they made their way to the east wing, where the painting of Jonathan Whitmore hung. Samantha's breath hitched when she saw it. A grand oil portrait, the old aristocrat's eyes stern and unblinking. But something was wrong. As she stepped closer, the eyes seemed to shift, the dark irises narrowing into cold slits. For a moment, the features twisted subtly, the face morphing into something grotesque, a twisted mockery that bore the unmistakable glint of Malachi's blood-red eyes. Samantha gasped and stumbled back. "Did you see that?" Anand peered anxiously. "It's just your imagination." But Sapna whispered, "No, it moved." They circled the painting cautiously. Sanjay reached out and traced the edge of the wooden frame, noting an unusual draft coming from behind the wall. "Help me push," he said. "There might be something hidden." Together they pushed against the wall. With a muffled crack, the plaster gave way, revealing a narrow cavity. Inside lay an iron strongbox, blackened by age and marked with ancient symbols carved into its surface, arcs and sigils that sent a shiver crawling down Samantha's spine. Anand's fingers trembled as he reached for the latch. "This is it, I think." The lock was rusted but gave way under the pressure. The box creaked open to reveal a skull, its empty eye sockets seeming to pulse with a sinister life. the jawbone slightly agape as if whispering a cursed secret. Around the cranium, strips of torn leather bore faded writing in a language no one recognized. The skull's teeth were sharp, jagged, like broken shards of glass. "Is this Malachi's head?" Anand asked, voice barely above a whisper, eyes wide. Samantha swallowed her rising dread. "It has to be." Sapna shivered. "We should seal this back up. We don't know what releasing this means." But Sanjay shook his head. "We can't just leave it out here. Someone could find it." Samantha nodded in agreement, heart pounding. "We'll take it to the church ruins tomorrow, back where the rest of his body's buried." They carefully lifted the strongbox from its hiding place, the weight heavier than expected, as if it carried a dark burden far beyond the flesh. The forest was nearly silent as they made their way toward the ruins of the old church, a desecrated sanctuary known among locals as Hollow's End. Vines clawed up the crumbling stone walls, stained glass shattered and scattered like forgotten dreams. The place had long been abandoned, after rumors of satanic rituals and disappearances whispered through the nearby towns. They came upon the altar, cracked and worn, and in the murky moonlight, the shadows gathered like living things. Sanjay set the strongbox down, the earth beneath seeming to tremble faintly. Suddenly, a rustling sounded from the underbrush. Sapna froze. "Did you hear that?" A figure emerged from the darkness. It was Sangha, a local drifter known for his reckless fascination with treasure hunting. His eyes gleamed with a wild light as he strode toward them silently. "What are you doing here?" Samantha demanded, stepping forward. Sangha's grin was unsettling, too wide, revealing yellowed teeth. "I heard about your little find. Thought I'd see for myself." Before they could react, Sangha lunged at the strongbox, his hands trembling as he grasped the skull. His eyes locked onto it, and an unnatural gleam spread across his face. The air grew thick, heavy, as if charged with a dark current. "Put it down," Sanjay shouted, but Sangha seemed no longer himself, his voice low and hollow. The skull's empty sockets glowed faintly red, and the whispers grew louder, echoing in the night. Sangha's knees buckled, and he collapsed to the ground in a trance, clutching the skull to his chest. His body convulsed violently as unseen forces twisted through him, veins darkening beneath the skin. "Help him," Sapna cried. Samantha knelt beside Sangha, feeling the cold pulse radiating from the skull. Then, with a guttural groan that seemed to split the earth itself, the severed head lifted, the jaw opening wider than possible in life. A voice seeped from the void, ancient and cruel. "So long as my head is severed from my body, a curse will linger," it hissed, "and your bloodline will bleed." The ground at the edge of the altar cracked open, revealing darkened soil that seemed to breathe. From the depths, a grotesque, headless shape clawed its way free, twisted limbs covered in gnarled flesh, its body pulsating with unnatural life. The nightmare was awakening. Samantha scrambled back, horror flooding her veins. Sanjay grabbed her hand, pulling her away as the creature rose, its empty neck raw and bleeding, hungry for its missing master's head. The night echoed with the unholy roar of Samuel's reborn, and in the shadows, something darker stirred. The forest whispered. The curse was no longer dormant. It was hungry. Chapter 4. The Unearthing of the Past. The heavy oak doors of the Witherspoon mansion groaned ominously as Sanjay pushed them open, the stale air inside wrapping around them like a suffocating shroud. Dust motes danced in the weak afternoon light slipping through cracked, stained glass windows, casting fractured, colorful shadows on the peeling wallpaper. Every step echoed hollowly in the cavernous halls, a reminder of decades long past, abandoned secrets lurking in the shadows. Suman's breath caught as her gaze fell upon the enormous portrait hanging above the grand staircase. The painting depicted their ancestor, Jonathan Witherspoon, the first patriarch of the family, a man whose eyes seemed to pierce through the very soul of the observer. His aristocratic features were stern, unyielding, but as Suman stared longer, a subtle shift unsettled her. The eyes, once cold and calculating, flickered, a dark glint of crimson erupting from the pupils, like embers smoldering beneath frozen ashes. "We shouldn't be here," Anand whispered, his voice trembling as he glanced nervously around the room. Sanjay clenched his jaw. "We came this far. We need to find the strongbox, the one Dad mentioned. It's the only way to understand what we're dealing with." Sapna's fingers tightened around Anand's arm. This place gives me the creeps. I don't like it. But Suman moved forward with purpose, her feet carrying her closer to the grand portrait. The walls around it bore the thick scars of age, cracks and peeling paint swallowed in deep shadows. She pressed her palm against the cold wood of the wall beneath the painting, and something shifted beneath her touch. A faint grinding noise echoed softly, like stone scraping against stone. Sanjay joined her, his fingers finding a loose brick concealed in the ornate molding. With a sudden fierce effort, they pried at the brick. Behind it, a dark hollow opened, revealing a rusted iron box, heavy, ancient, and ominous. The room seemed to exhale as they extracted the box. The air chilled as if the house itself recoiled. Could this be it? Suman's voice broke the silence, barely more than a whisper. Anand knelt down, brushing decades of dust off the lid. If this is what the family legend says, it better be in there. Open it carefully, Sanjay warned, his eyes darting around the room, as if expecting something to burst forth from the shadows. The hinges creaked open, revealing a mummified object wrapped in tattered leather and faded crimson cloth. At first it was just a strange shape, curiously misshapen, but as they unfurled the wrappings, horror crystallized between them. A severed head, grotesquely preserved, its skin pulled tight over sharp cheekbones, and the eyes, empty sockets now, but somehow they still seemed to glimmer malevolently. A faint whisper of movement curled along the edges of the lids. The blood-red gleam of eyes that should have been lifeless. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of decay and something far older, something inhuman. Sapna stumbled back, releasing a strangled scream. "Put it down," she cried. Anand swallowed hard but nodded, carefully replacing the head into the box. "We can't just leave this lying around. This has to go back behind the old church ruins. It's the only way to contain this thing." Suman shivered, but steeled herself. "We'll seal it back tomorrow, first thing. Tonight, we get out of here." As they turned to leave, the painting above the staircase seemed to watch them with a gaze that had shifted yet again. No longer the cold eyes of a distant ancestor, but the burning, bloodshot stare of something far darker, something that seemed to hunger. Hours later, in the middle of the night, the quiet town of Black Hollow was broken by a chilling, unnatural scream echoing across the hills, piercing, guttural, and filled with rage. Sangha, a local drifter and self-proclaimed treasure hunter, had been wandering the Witherspoon mansion alone. His boots scuffed against the debris-strewn floor as he stumbled upon the iron box left carelessly in a shadowed corner. Something about the head called to him, a whisper in the darkness, a song of power. His fingers trembled as he lifted the box, the head seemingly pulsing, veins glowing with a dull red light beneath desiccated skin. The cold touch sent a shiver up his spine. The eyes opened, twin orbs of fiery crimson locking onto his, fixing him in place. A voice, ancient and venomous, slithered into his mind, promises of strength, revenge, and dominion. The curse bound within that severed head reached out through time and space, ensnaring Sangha's will. The next morning, the townspeople found Sangha's empty car abandoned near the old church ruins, an ancient place once desecrated by a cult long since broken. The crumbling stone walls, scarred with arcane symbols and bloodstains, stood silent under the gray morning sky. Behind the altar, half buried beneath rubble and twisted roots, lay a grisly sight, a headless, decaying body, the legend of the old evil made flesh once more. And then the sound rose, a guttural roar that reverberated against the stones, a sound not human, but born in hell. The head rejoined with its body by unholy ritual, pulsed with dark energy, veins throbbing, breathing life back into a nightmare. The earth trembled beneath their feet. Windows shattered in the distance. The smell of burning sulfur filled the cold air. No one dared approach the ruins. Back in the town, whispers spread like wildfire. Families barred their doors. Children huddled beneath blankets, eyes wide with fear. The curse, long dormant, was alive again. Suman's phone vibrated relentlessly, the screen flashing with frantic texts from Sanjay. "Something's happening. You need to stay inside. Don't trust anyone." But as she stared at the messages, a shadow fell across her window. Outside in the darkening twilight, eyes gleamed red and unblinking, watching, waiting. The ancient evil had awakened, and it hungered for more. Chapter 5. The Awakening. The night clung heavy and suffocating over the crumbling relic of the Clayton estate. its skeletal frame silhouetted against the smoky sky like a dying beast. Moonlight, pale and washed out, seeped through broken window panes, casting fractured shadows across peeling wallpaper and shattered chandeliers. A stale cold crept beneath the floorboards, as if the house itself exhaled a breath long held, a breath waiting to be released. Inside, the air was thick with dust and something far fouler, an ancient stench of decay and malevolence, mingling with the sharp tang of rusted iron. Sanjay's heartbeat thudded loud in his ears as he and his friends, Anand and Sapna, staggered through the long-forgotten corridors of the once grand mansion. The weight of the past pressed down on them, unyielding, brooding. Their fingers trembled as they pried open the narrow passage behind the faded portrait of Charles Clayton, the original patriarch, whose steely eyes seemed to follow their every move. The painting's surface rippled unnaturally, as if alive, something sinister lurking just beneath the veneer of oil and canvas. Anand swallowed hard, the image of a twisted, blood-red gaze flickering beneath the aristocrat's cold stare. "Are you sure this is what we're looking for?" Sapna whispered, voice brittle. She clutched Anand's arm tightly. Sanjay nodded, though doubt gnawed at the edges of his certainty. The journal said the box is behind the painting. The family kept it hidden here, locked away for centuries. With growing unease, Anand slid the iron clasp of the ancient wall safe open. The heavy wooden panel creaked, revealing a small chest covered in faded sigils, scratched crosses inverted and twisted into grotesque shapes. The heavy lid groaned as Sanjay lifted it gently. Inside rested a severed head, eyes wide and unblinking, with skin pale and almost translucent, veins like black threads running beneath the surface. The mouth hung slightly agape in a frozen rictus of eternal hunger. Even in death it held a terrible dignity, as if the man it had belonged to had refused to seat his soul quietly. "This can't be real," Anand breathed, voice barely audible. "It's the head," Sanjay said, swallowing hard as cold sweat beaded on his forehead. "Of the devil's priest, the one my great-grandfather told me about." Sapna's eyes darted nervously around the dim room. "We should put it back and leave. This place gives me the creeps." But curiosity, or perhaps something darker, had already woven its tendrils deep into their minds. Unaware of the consequences, they packed the box carefully, their hands trembling as they secured the lid. Later that night, the house groaned and shifted with the weight of unseen breath. The air grew thick, heavy with whispered promises of vengeance and dread, waiting for its chance to break free. Sangha had always been a restless soul, drawn by a reckless hunger for secrets buried deep beneath the surface of mundane life. Armed with a shovel and an insatiable curiosity, he returned to the Clayton estate under cover of darkness, long after his friends had fled. Moonlight fought with low-hanging clouds as he crept through the overgrown courtyard toward the crumbling wall at the estate's edge. His heart hammered with a mixture of fear and excitement. This was where the old stories said the body was buried, headless yet not forgotten. His breath caught in his throat when his shovel hit something hard, a rough texture unlike earth. He cleared away soil and debris until he revealed a stone slab, cracked and mottled with age. Fingers trembling, he pushed aside the stones covering a hollow beneath. And there, in the deepest shadows, lay a grotesque form, an emaciated headless torso, bound with ancient chains etched with impossibly dark runes that pulsed faintly with cursed power. A chill like death itself rose up Sangha's spine. As his eyes adjusted, he saw it, the severed head resting beside the torso, eyes glowing a sinister, unnatural red. A sudden, hypnotic force seized him, tendrils of unseen power weaving around his mind. His knees buckled as a cold voice whispered venomous commands deep inside his skull. "No, no," Sangha gasped, struggling against the invisible bonds, but the force was relentless. The head's malevolent gaze pierced his soul, beckoning him like a siren of doom. He rose, entranced, and with trembling hands, guided by the cursed will of the ancient evil, he lifted the head and carried it to the fetid grave behind the estate. As the head drew closer, a faint, unholy light glowed from the cracks in the ground. The air thickened with the smell of sulfur and rot. The earth seemed to pulse beneath his feet as the head was placed atop the body. A ghastly sound tore through the night, the sickening wet sound of flesh reknitting, sinew twisting painfully as the ancient corpse reanimated. A hideous roar shattered the silence, an otherworldly guttural growl that seemed to tear through the fabric of reality itself. Samri was reborn. The ancient evil stalked forth, eyes burning like embers, dripping malevolence with every breath. His skin was pale as death, slick and mottled with bruises and dark veins pulsing with black ichor. Shadows seemed to cling to him, coiling like serpents, as he moved with unnatural swiftness and terrible purpose. The cursed bloodline trembled under the shadow of his wrath. In town, animals fled, and dogs howled at nothing. Lights flickered and died. The wind carried faint, wailing echoes that unsettled even the bravest. Anand and Sapna tried to flee, but were seized by a nightmare of blood and terror. Their screams echoed through the night as Samri's wrath consumed them, their bodies torn and broken, left as grisly warnings for those who dared to defy the curse. The townspeople's fear grew, suspicion festering in dark whispers, accusations and paranoia turning neighbor against neighbor. Doors were barred, fires lit, but the ancient evil was no ordinary threat. Tucker Clayton, descendant of the cursed line, arrived too late. His eyes, once steely with pride, now held desperate fear. He carried no answers, only a haunted knowledge of the doom born centuries ago. As people fled to the old, desecrated church, the only place rumored to hold any protection, the atmosphere thickened with dread. The church doors creaked open, revealing a sanctuary tainted by occult symbols, scratched into the walls, candles blackened, and foul smoke lingering in the air. Here they gathered, seeking refuge in the one place where Samri's evil could not tread. Amid the trembling crowd, Sanjay's gaze locked onto a broken trident, an ancient clisted relic carved with arcane sigils, resting forgotten on the altar's edge. A sudden clarity washed over him, a whisper in the darkness guiding his fractured thoughts. This trident was the key, but retrieving it would mean returning to the Clayton estate, to face the wrath of Samri in his lair, alone, vulnerable, and hunted. The church's heavy doors slammed shut behind them, muffling the furious howls that echoed from the estate. Outside, in the shadows, something moved, silent, patient, eternal. The night was far from over, and the nightmare was only beginning. Chapter 6. The Awakening in the Hollow. The night air clung heavy with mist, the kind that creeps in like a slow, wet breath through the cracks of an old house. The estate's decaying mansion sat perched on the hill, overlooking the small town of Ashbourne like a forgotten sentinel of dread. Its cracked windows stared blankly into the void, the once grand columns now troubled by vines that twisted and gnarled like skeletal fingers. The wind whispered through the broken frames, carrying fragments of long-lost secrets. Inside the mansion, the air was thick with dust and cold shadows. Suman's heart pounded against her ribs like a frantic drum, each beat echoing in the vast hollow spaces of the empty halls. Her eyes darted nervously, flicking between the peeling wallpaper and the portraits that clung stubbornly to the walls. Among them hung the imposing oil painting of Nathaniel Blackwood, the ancestor whose name still echoed with reverence and fear in their family. His eyes, dark and piercing, seemed alive in the flickering candlelight, and whenever Suman met his gaze, a fleeting, sinister reflection appeared behind his somber countenance, eyes ablaze with a cruel, blazing red. Her breath caught. The legend was no longer just words whispered by frightened elders. Something lurked, watching, waiting. "It's just a painting," Sanjay murmured beside her, his voice a tentative anchor in the suffocating gloom. "But, yeah, it kind of freaks me out." Anand, ever the skeptic, pulled out the small crowbar they had brought along. "We're cracking this thing open. If there's a secret, we're finding it tonight." Sapna clung quietly to Anand's arm, her eyes wide but resolute. Together they set to work. The wooden panel hiding the wall behind the portrait groaned as Sanjay pried and Anand hammered. Then, with a reluctant groan, the plaster crumbled away, revealing a narrow recess. Within it rested an ancient iron-bound strongbox, blackened by time and tarnished beyond recognition. Suman's fingers trembled as she reached out and lifted the lid. Inside lay a head, not of a brave soldier as they had half-joked, but something far more grotesque. The skin was pale and stretched tight over the skull, the lips curled back in a rictus grin. Tufts of stringy black hair clung to the scalp, and the eyes, oh God, the eyes, were open, frozen in a sinister bloodshot blare. They gleamed with unnatural life, glowing faintly like embers smoldering in the dark. The mouth seemed to twitch, as if savoring a cruel joke only it could understand. "Is this like a preserved head?" Anand whispered, his voice barely above a breath. "More like cursed," Sanjay said, swallowing hard. Suman's gaze locked onto the head, and an invisible thread tugged at her mind, the same agonizing gaze from the painting now mirrored in the severed skull. A chilling whisper slithered through the silence. Impossible to place, yet undeniably there. Suddenly, the candlelight flickered violently, and the temperature plunged, breath misting like frost in the air. For a moment the room felt torn, as if reality itself were beginning to unravel. "We should seal it back up," Suman said, voice shaking, "before something worse happens." But fate had other plans. Hours later, unbeknownst to the others who had retreated to the warmth of their rooms, Sangha, the mansion's caretaker, prowled the shadows in search of forgotten treasures. Desperation had driven him deep into the mansion's forgotten chambers, driven by rumors of fortune buried beneath the Blackwood legacy. His lantern swung low, casting flickering light across the damp stone floor and rotting rafters. And then he saw it, the iron box, ominously open, the severed head resting there like a grotesque relic, alive with a terrible hunger. Drawn by a force older than reason, Sangha reached out, and the moment his fingers brushed the cold flesh, his eyes glazed over, pupils dilating into endless black abysses. The house itself seemed to groan, as though waking from a long nightmare. The head's mouth parted in a low, guttural hiss, a sound like death whispered in the dark. Compelled by a terrible will, Sangha staggered to his feet and cradled the head as if it were a child. The walls echoed with the pounding of unseen drums, blood pounding in his ears. By the time dawn's weak light bled over the horizon, Sangha was far away, trudging through the dense woods towards the hollow, the desolate place where the ruins of an old satanic cult lay hidden beneath twisted oaks and ragged brambles. The desecrated ground reeked of burnt offerings and forgotten screams. No one dared go there, except those who worshipped shadows. The air in the hollow was thick with a rancid metallic scent, old blood, burnt incense, and something far worse. Sangha's hands shook as he placed the severed head upon a jagged stone altar, carved with unholy symbols of twisted serpents and inverted crosses. A sudden wind whipped through the clearing, scattering dead leaves and chilling the marrow of his bones. The sky above darkened unnaturally, blotting out even the faintest stars. And then, the impossible happened. With a sound like 1,000 tearing limbs, the earth trembled beneath the altar. From the shadows emerged a figure, hulking, monstrous, and ancient as the night itself. Its body was a patchwork of twisted flesh and bone, ragged and dripping with a black ichor that seemed to absorb the faint moonlight. Where its face should have been, only a brutal wound remained, an empty neck, freshly severed. But atop the altar, the head's eyes snapped open, flooding the clearing with a crimson glow. The severed skull began to rise, levitating slowly, suspended by some dark, unholy force. The head rejoined the neckless body. A shudder tore through the creature's form as it took its first tortured breath in centuries. The entity, Samri reborn, stood tall, its jaws stretched into a sinister grin, eyes burning with infernal fire. Sangha collapsed to the ground, free from the thrall but hollowed out, his soul left behind with the ancient evil he had awakened. As the unholy creature stepped forward, the trees around the hollow groaned and bent, shadows writhing like living things. Back in Ashbourne, the streets stirred with unease. Windows shuddered as people whispered of dark shapes seen flickering behind broken glass, of screams muffled by the wind. The Blackwood Curse, long dormant, had come alive. Suman's phone buzzed beside her, an unknown number flashing on the screen, but she hesitated to answer. A faint, terrible whisper slid through the room, a voice that promised pain and death, and the promise that the nightmare was just beginning. And far away, in the cursed hollow, the creature licked its lips, the first drop of bloodied ichor dripping to the cracked stone like a dark benediction. Chapter 7. The Awakening. The night had grown thick and suffocating over the crumbling mansions and forgotten streets of Ravencroft. A cold wind, sharp and biting, slipped through the broken windows of the old Whitmore estate, whispering secrets only the dead could understand. Inside, the air hung heavy with decay and dust, the scent of rotting wood mingling with something far fouler, something metallic, ancient, and dreadfully alive. Sanjay's hands trembled as he held the iron box, a small rusted chest they had uncovered behind the faded portrait of Jonathan Whitmore, the first of their line. The painting's cracked eyes seemed to follow him still, dark hollows shifting with an eerie life of their own whenever he dared to glance away. He and his friends, Anand and Sapna, had spent hours chipping away at the crumbling wall, driven by a mix of youthful recklessness and the desperate hope of uncovering a clue to the curse that shadowed Suman's family. But none of them had expected what lay inside. Now, in the claustrophobic cellar beneath the mansion, the box lay open on a tattered table. Inside, nestled in a bed of brittle blackened velvet, was a head, not a man's head, but something far older, twisted beyond nature. Pale, gaunt, and grotesque, with hollow sockets that seemed to burn with a crimson light, the severed head of Malachi, the name whispered in fear by the Whitmores for centuries. His eyes, once dull and lifeless, suddenly flared to a burning red as if sensing freedom. The air thickened, charged with a malevolent energy that made the hairs on Sanjay's neck rise. Sapna gasped, clutching Anand's arm, her eyes wide with terror. The flickering candlelight cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to reach for the severed head, as if the walls themselves were alive with dark hunger. "We should seal it back," Anand whispered, voice cracking. But Sanjay could not move. His gaze was locked on Malachi's burning eyes, as if a hypnotic force anchored him to the spot. The head's lips parted in a slow, cruel smile, and in that moment Sanjay felt something cold, like ice water flooding his veins, a sinister whisper slipping into his mind. "Bring me to the forgotten altar. Rejoin me, and the curse shall end, or begin anew." Anand shook Sanjay's shoulder, breaking the spell. "Come on, we need to go," he urged. But Sanjay's feet remained rooted. The head's glow pulsed, a heartbeat of ancient evil, and the cellar grew impossibly darker, the walls closing in. Suddenly, the box slammed shut with a deafening snap. The room plunged into darkness, pierced only by the flicker of a dying candle. A rush of wind extinguished the flame, and the cellar was swallowed by pitch black. "San," Sapna's voice cut off in a strangled scream. A cold hand gripped Sanjay's ankle like a serpent's coil. The headless terror's voice, now a guttural growl, echoing in the shadowed depths of his mind. "You will free me, or all shall perish in your bloodline's name." By dawn, the town of Ravencroft had already begun to stir, but darkness lingered like a stain over the Whitmore estate. Somewhere within the mansion's sprawling ruins, Sanjay's body lay unconscious, limp as a rag doll, while deep beneath the earth, in a forgotten clearing where the Satanic cult had once gathered, a dark ritual was beginning. Sangha, the local scavenger and thrill-seeker, had stumbled onto something he shouldn't have. Malachi's head, lost and unloved, hidden beneath the layers of time. Mesmerized by its unnatural glow, he had been drawn like a moth to flame, compelled by a force that rejected reason and sanity. Now, under a gibbous moon suspended in a bruised sky, Sangha knelt at the heart of the abandoned place, a desecrated chapel, the altar cracked and barren, stained with old blood long dried. He cradled the head, whispering words in a tongue too ancient to understand, words that clawed at the veil separating this world from the abyss. The wind howled through broken stained glass windows, shards clinking like distant bells. The trees surrounding the chapel seemed to lean closer, skeletal branches scraping the night like the fingers of the dead. The earth beneath Sangha's knees trembled, the ground splitting open where roots writhed like serpents. Then came the sound, a wet, sickening roar that echoed through the hollowed woods, a cry from beyond the grave. Malachi's head pulsated, veins of red energy shooting like lightning through the dark. Slowly, impossibly, a hand, twisted skeletal and dripping with shadow, emerged from the earth. Then an arm, a torso, and with a final agonizing shudder, the ancient form of Malachi rose, whole again. His eyes smoldered with the fire of hell itself. His mouth twisted into a grin that promised pain, death, and despair. "You have awakened me." His voice was gravel and ash. "Now the curse begins. Now the blood must be paid." Back at the Whitmore mansion, the atmosphere was thick with dread. Suman paced the grand hall, her heart a wild drumbeat in her chest. The old portraits, faces blurred by time, watched her with silent accusation. Thakur Ranvir's warnings echoed in her mind, a heavy weight she had tried to shake. Suddenly the air shifted. The temperature dropped. A low growl rumbled beneath the floorboards. The windows rattled, as if something enormous and terrible struggled to break free from the shadows encasing the house. Suman froze, her breath catching in her throat. A faint, unmistakable sound came from the cellar. A slow, dragging noise, like a coffin being dragged across stone. "Sanjay?" she whispered, heart pounding. The floor beneath her seemed to pulse, as if alive. Through the darkness, a shape began to take form, a hulking silhouette, dripping with shadow and rage, eyes gleaming red in the gloom. Malachi was loose, and he was hungry. Outside, in the dense woods surrounding Ravencroft, the wind carried a new and terrible sound, one that would haunt the town for generations. The unholy, guttural roar of an ancient evil reborn. The curse had begun. Chapter 8. The Awakening of the Dreadlord. The night pressed in like a suffocating shroud, the kind that settled over Black Hollow, like a curse forgotten by time but never lifted. The wind whispered through the skeletal trees, their gnarled limbs clawing at the sky as if trying to tear holes in the black silence. Moonlight shimmered faintly across the cracked pavement of the old Ashcroft estate, casting long, unnatural shadows that writhed like living things. In the distance, the ruined chapel waited, dark, abandoned, and soaked with the echoes of 1,000 unspoken evils. Inside the grand yet decaying mansion, the air was thick with dust and the scent of old blood. The walls, once proud with portraits of Ashcroft ancestors, now seemed to watch with cold, accusing eyes. In particular, the massive painting of Jonathan Ashcroft, the patriarch who, 2 centuries ago, had damned his family with a terrible curse. Tonight, that portrait seemed to breathe, the eyes flickering with something sinister. It was not Jonathan's steady, cold gaze they saw, but the glowing, malevolent eyes of Malachar, the ancient demon worshipper who had once terrorized the Bloodline. Suman stood motionless, her breath caught in her throat as the painting's eyes shifted again, locking onto hers with a clarity that made her skin crawl. Beside her, Sanjay's knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the cracked marble mantelpiece, refusing to look away. Anand and Sapna lingered near the doorway, both pale and tense, the air around them heavy with dread. "Did you see that?" Suman whispered, barely audible. Anand nodded, swallowing hard. "It's like it's watching us." But the true terror was yet to come. After hours of searching, driven by a mix of desperate hope and reckless courage, the 4 had uncovered a hidden panel behind the portrait. The wood was splintered and brittle, leading to an ancient cavity concealed within the wall. There, nestled in dust and cobwebs, lay a rusted iron box, a reliquary of evil long sealed away. With trembling hands, Sanjay pried it open. Inside rested a grotesque, preserved human head, eyes wide open but milky white, lips pulled back in a frozen sneer. The hair was matted with dirt and dried blood, and a faint aura of cold radiated from it, like the absence of warmth itself. "Is this the head?" Sapna whispered, voice shaking. "Whoever it belonged to, it's not just a corpse," Anand replied, his tone grim. "There's something wrong with it." But the others barely heard him. They were already retreating, intending to reseal the box and return it to its hidden place by morning. Outside, the night deepened to a suffocating blackness. The decaying mansion groaned with the weight of its own history as the group made their way to the old burial grounds behind what remained of the Ashcroft Chapel, a desecrated place where shadows clung to the broken pews and the altar was smeared with the remnants of dark rituals. It was here that the head was meant to stay buried, apart from its body, so the legend said. The curse, passed down through generations, had claimed the lives of every woman in the Ashcroft line at childbirth, a monstrous penalty for the sins of their ancestor, who had sentenced Malachar to death 2 centuries ago. But fate, cruel and unyielding, had other plans. The night's silence was shattered when Senga, a local treasure hunter with a reckless streak, stumbled through the estate. Drawn by rumors of hidden artifacts and family gold, he wandered into the mansion just as the group departed. His eyes gleamed with greed and excitement as he spotted the iron box, left carelessly exposed. Ignoring his better judgment, Senga reached out, his fingers brushing the box's cold metal. The moment he touched it, a shudder rippled through the earth. The head's eyes snapped open, blood-red crescents burning with eldritch fire. A low, guttural whisper slithered into Sanga's mind, a voice ancient as the void itself. "Bring me home." His body seized, muscles twisting into unnatural contortions. His face drained of color as a sinister trance took hold. His lips parted, and in a voice not entirely his own, he repeated the curse's dark command. The head's unseen power compelled Sanga to do the unthinkable. Behind the shattered altar of the ruined chapel, soil turned dark and damp as bones long buried stirred uneasily beneath the surface. The air trembled with a terrible energy that pulsed like a heartbeat of shadow. There, beneath the cracked stone cross, the desiccated body of Malachar waited in silence, headless, yet far from lifeless. Sanga appeared out of the darkness, the iron box clutched tightly. His trance led him to pry open the soil, revealing the withered corpse beneath. As he lifted the head from the box and brought it toward the necklace body, the ground itself seemed to come alive. The moment the severed head reunited with the body, a horrific, guttural moan ripped through the night. The corpse shuddered violently, flesh writhed and twisted as sinew knitted rapidly, bone cracked and reformed, and skin stitched itself back together with a sickening wet sound. The eyes, now fully blood-red, opened in an infernal awakening. Malachar had returned. His breath was like the rasping of dead leaves in a winter graveyard, his limbs jerky and unnatural. The curse that haunted the Ashcroft line was no longer a mere legend. It was flesh and bone and unquenchable malice. Back at the estate, word spread like wildfire. Strange sounds echoed in the village, screams, the breaking of glass, and the chilling laughter of something unholy. Anand and Sapna, once skeptical, now faced their worst nightmares come alive. One by one, townsfolk began to vanish or turn up mutilated, their faces frozen in terror. The darkness seemed to seep from the Ashcroft estate itself, swallowing hope and sanity alike. Thakur Ranveer Singh, or rather Jeremiah Ashcroft, the current patriarch, rushed to the scene, his face etched with desperation and ancient knowledge. But even he was at a loss. The rituals and protections of old were useless against a being who had transcended death itself. The village folk took refuge in the desecrated chapel, lighting circles of salt and scattering occult symbols hastily drawn in chalk. The air hummed with anxious energy as they prayed not to any god, but to the old spirits of light, hoping the ancient protections would hold. Sanjay clutched the trident-shaped relic, a ceremonial forked spear discovered earlier in the mansion, which pulsed with a faint, otherworldly glow. The visions that had guided him spoke clearly now. The trident was the key to halting Malachar's rampage. But the trident was nowhere to be found. In the chaos of the attack, Durjan, a shadowy figure with unknown motives, had moved it to an undisclosed location deep within the Ashcroft mansion itself. Time was running out. With a small band of survivors, Sanjay and Suman prepared to return to the estate, determined to confront the demon and end the nightmare once and for all. But as they crept through the crumbling halls, a cold presence stalked them, whispering promises of death and despair. Malachar was coming, and this time he did not come alone. From the shadows rose a chorus of disembodied voices, horrid and unearthly, chanting in a language lost to centuries. The walls bled darkness, and the floorboards groaned beneath unseen weights. Then the lights flickered and died, and in the absolute blackness, a voice rasped from the void. The blood of Ashcroft will be spilled, and the curse fulfilled. A sound like scraping nails on stone echoed as a figure stepped forward, tall, twisted, and utterly inhuman, a shadow clad in tattered remnants of forgotten centuries. Sanjay's heart thundered in his chest. The nightmare had only just begun. Chapter 9. The night settled over Black Hollow like a suffocating shroud. The thick fog curling around skeletal trees and forgotten gravestones in the old cemetery on the outskirts of town. Beneath the moon's pale glare, the ruins of St. Michael's Chapel lay crumbling, a desecrated relic where cultists once held their sinister rites, the walls blackened by flame and scarred by ancient symbols too profane to speak aloud. It was here, amid the dozen broken pews and shattered stained glass, that the last of the Harrow family's hope now clung. Samantha Harrow stood on the threshold, the chill night breeze tugging at her long, dark hair, her breath shallow and uneven. Her wide eyes searched the shadowed chapel interior, where glimpses of decayed altar and overturned crosses caught the scant light, each one a stark reminder of the evil that had festered here centuries ago. The air was heavy, oppressive, soaked with a palpable dread that pressed down on her chest like a weighted stone. Beside her, Sanjay's hand tightened around hers, grounding her. He was the only thing tethering her to the real world, the only warmth left amid the cold breath of history's darkest sins. Across from them, her father, Caleb Harrow, stood rigid, his face pale beneath the sharp moonlight, eyes sunken with the weight of family curses and unspoken guilt. "You shouldn't have come," Caleb said, his voice hoarse, cracking like aged wood. "This place, it's poison. It's where the darkness breathes." Samantha shook her head, determination hardening her features. "We have to finish this. It's the only way to stop him." Caleb's gaze flickered over to the shattered altar. Remnants of candles melted into pools of black wax, surrounded by grotesque sigils, etched deep into the stone floor. The air seemed to pulse, a suffocating heartbeat that filled the chapel, as if the darkness itself were alive, watching. "They said he was bound here," Sanjay murmured, eyes flicking toward the altar. "That the cult's leader, Malachi, was torn apart, but his head was sealed away like some twisted trophy." Caleb nodded. "But that head wasn't buried here. It was kept hidden in the Harrow estate all these years, until tonight." Samantha's mind flashed back to the harrowing moment when the strongbox had been pried open, the severed head gleaming with malevolence, its glassy eyes burning with cruel life. Malachi had cursed their bloodline centuries ago, his voice echoing in her mind, promising death to every woman at childbirth, promising unspeakable horror when the head met the body again. And now, that nightmare had come true. A sudden movement caught Samantha's eye. From the deepest shadow, a figure emerged, tall, gaunt, with skin like cracked parchment stretched taut over bone. Malachi's head, grotesquely reattached, sat atop a bloated, half-decayed body that dragged itself into the moonlight. His eyes, two burning coals of hellfire, fixed on the trio with ancient hunger. "Finally," he rasped, voice like dry leaves scraping stone. "The blood of Harrow returns to feed the night." The wind howled through the broken windows, scattering dust and ash. Samantha felt a coldness rising, not just from the chill, but from the primordial evil that slithered just beneath Malachi's twisted grin. Sanjay stepped forward, his grip loosening only briefly on Samantha's hand to draw the trident-shaped pendant from beneath his shirt, the relic their grandfather had whispered about, rumored to be the key to restraining Malachi's power. The trident glowed faintly in the darkness, its three prongs shimmering with an inner light that pushed back the shadows. "You don't belong here," Sanjay said steadily, voice stronger than he felt. "You don't belong to this world." Malachi's gaze flicked to the trident, and a guttural laugh exploded from his throat, thick with centuries of rage and madness. "You think this toy can bind me? I am the darkness before the dawn, the shadow that stalks your bloodline." With unnatural speed he lunged, claws extended, dragging himself across the rubble toward them. Samantha stumbled back, her heart hammering, breath ragged. The floor beneath them seemed to ripple, the painted symbols around the altar glowing faintly, awakening from decades of dormancy. "Use the trident," Caleb urged, voice trembling with a mixture of fear and hope. "It's the only thing that can hold him." Sanjay raised the pendant, focusing every ounce of will into it, willing it to pulse brighter, to burn away the evil that seeped into the chapel like smoke. The room trembled. Shadows writhed and screamed in silence, curling around Malachi like serpents. A terrible, guttural roar tore through the night as Malachi reared back, claws clawing at the invisible barrier the trident conjured. His face contorted with rage and pain, ancient agony born from centuries of imprisonment and broken promises. But the fight was far from over. Suddenly, from behind a shattered pew, a whisper rose, a voice not Malachi's, but colder, darker. Samantha turned sharply as the shadows deepened, coalescing into a silhouette even more terrifying than Malachi himself, a shape that seemed devoid of any humanity, eyes burning with the purest hate. "You meddle with forces you cannot comprehend," the shadow hissed, voice a serpent's tongue wrapping around their bones. "This is but the beginning. The curse will unfold in ways you have never dared imagine." Samantha's skin prickled. She looked to Sanjay, who returned her gaze with a silent plea. "Run, fight, or be consumed." Behind them, the chapel's rotten floorboards groaned, cracking under invisible weight. From the darkness, unseen horrors crept closer. The trident's light flickered. The heavy chapel doors slammed shut with a thunderous bang, sealing them inside. A deep, guttural growl echoed from the shadows. Malachi smiled, teeth sharp and gleaming in the dark. "We rise with the blood of the cursed," he whispered, and the darkness around them began to move. Chapter 10. The The burning of the nameless. The night air was thick with the scent of cedar smoke and damp earth, mixing with the acrid tang of fire and something far older. An ancient malevolence that had soaked into the soil beneath the crumbling ruins of the forsaken chapel. The moon hung low and swollen, a pallid eye watching the grim theater unfold below. Sanjay gripped the jagged iron trident tightly, knuckles white from the strain. The metal prongs, dull and rusted, seemed to hum with a cold power that seeped into his bones, an otherworldly chill, matched only by the electric tension in the air. Beside him, Suman's breath came in ragged gasps, eyes wild and shining with desperate hope. The flickering bonfire's light painted their faces in flickers of gold and shadow, as they stood guard over the hastily constructed pyre that now held a coffin that contained the nightmare reborn. Samri. The name tasted like ash on Sanjay's tongue. From the ancient burial ground behind the desecrated chapel, a growl rumbled low and deep, carrying the scent of decay and iron. The earth trembled beneath their feet. The ground where the headless body had rested in defiled silence for 2 centuries was no longer empty. A sinister crack echoed, sharp as shattered glass. The coffin's lid splintered, black smoke pouring forth like a living thing, twisting in the night air, thick and choking. The tattered remains of Samri's body writhed inside, a grotesque, half-formed thing of shadow and sinew, its headless form gnashing in fury. The smell was unbearable, rotted meat, stale blood, and something that made Sanjay's stomach turn with revulsion. Then, with a gruesome snap, the head reappeared, eyes blazing crimson, skin slick and pale as moonlight on dead flesh, and a mouth curling into a terrible, unnatural grin. Samri's return was no secret. It was an unholy announcement to the world, and this night was far from over. "We don't have much time," Suman hissed, her voice breaking the tense silence. She glanced behind them, toward the small cluster of frightened townsfolk huddled at the edge of the clearing, their faces pale in the firelight. Thakur Ranveer Singh, the last scion of the old American aristocracy that had once ruled the region, was nowhere to be seen. His absence gnawed at Sanjay's resolve, but he squeezed Suman's hand in reassurance. "We fight, we end this now." Samri surged forward, the coffin bursting open as he clawed his way out like a creature risen from hell itself. His movements were jerky and unnatural, as if the stitching of his cursed flesh strained against something unseen. His blood-red eyes locked onto the trident, which Sanjay brandished like a beacon of defiance. The air crackled with dark energy as Samri let out a guttural roar, a sound that felt like it could crack the night sky itself. The ground around them seemed to warp and bend, shadows twisting and contorting as if alive, writhing like serpents eager to devour. Sanjay held his ground, stepping forward with the trident raised. The metal prongs glowed faintly, as if feeding off the hatred in the air. From somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice whispered, ancient, wise, and terrifying. The key to Samri's undoing was not just the trident, but what it represented. The occult symbols etched into the iron were the sigils of binding, occult wards forged centuries ago to imprison the unholy. But Samri was no ordinary demon. He was something older, something darker, a remnant of a time when mankind's fears were worshipped in blood and fire. The battle was a desperate, brutal dance macabre. Samri's claws scratched the earth, and with each swipe, tendrils of black mist reached out, seeking to snuff the light from Sanjay's heart. The trident struck again and again, releasing bursts of blinding energy that seared the creature's flesh. But still, Samri's laughter echoed, a chilling cacophony that made the hair on the back of Sanjay's neck stand on end. Suman stepped forward, chanting in a tongue older than the town itself, words heard only in the whispered legends of the cursed family. She traced symbols in the dirt with trembling fingers, symbols of banishment and binding, passed down through generations, like a secret weapon hidden in plain sight. "Now, Sanjay," she cried. With a roar, Sanjay plunged the trident into Samri's chest. The hellish creature screamed, an unearthly shriek that shattered the night like broken glass. Black smoke gushed from the wound, writhing and twisting before being sucked back into the trident's point like a ravenous beast retreating to its lair. But Samri's fury was far from spent. He grabbed the trident's shaft with one gnarled hand, ripping it free. His eyes blazed brighter, veins of crimson light pulsing beneath his rotten flesh. "You cannot kill what is already dead," he hissed, voice like the grinding of stones. Then, with a speed that defied his monstrous form, Samri lunged for Suman. "Run!" Sanjay screamed, throwing himself into the path of the attack. The trident and Samri's claws collided in a shower of sparks and shadow, the force throwing Sanjay back into the dirt. His vision blurred, pain blossoming in his side. But even as the darkness pressed in, his eyes caught sight of it. The ancient symbol freshly etched into the chapel's broken altar, glowing faintly in the moonlight. The place where the battle began was also the key to the fight's outcome. Suman scrambled toward the altar, her whispered chants growing louder, stronger. The townsfolk watched from the shadows, some clutching amulets, others raising crude talismans fashioned from bone and rusted iron. The old rites were awakening, binding this place with a fragile shield of occult power. Behind them, Samri snarled, sensing that his time was slipping away. He tore through the earth itself, black tendrils sprouting like poisonous vines from his form, seeking to ensnare the altar and silence the ritual forever. Suddenly, a deafening crack split the night. The ground beneath Samri fractured violently, opening a chasm of shadow and flame. The creature howled in rage and agony as the earth seemed to swallow him whole, dragging him down into a pit of eternal darkness. For a moment, silence fell like a shroud. The townspeople exhaled, relief washing over them like a cleansing rain. Suman collapsed to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Sanjay limped to her side, his hand still clutching the cold iron of the trident. But then, a whisper, soft and chilling, threading through the cold night air. From the depths of the chasm came the faintest sound, a slow, deliberate tapping. Tap, tap, tap. The earth trembled again, and beneath the broken altar's shattered stones, a pair of crimson eyes opened wide, blazing with eternal hunger. The nightmare had only just begun.